Hello, my dear friends. Giving birth in medieval times was not only a moment of welcoming life, but also a step into a life-or-death gamble. Inside a closed room, where dim light filtered through the cracks of the door, the mother struggled with pain while surrounded by strange rituals and harsh rules. Every object, every vow, every action was believed to decide the fate of mother and child. There are things that sound fantastic today, but at that time, they were common sense. Tonight, you will step into that world to witness it all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now we dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background, and let's embark on this journey together tonight. If you ever thought that a medieval bride could ease slowly into her new life, you would be far from the reality most women faced. In many households, the duty of producing a child began almost as soon as the wedding feast ended. A wife stepped into her husband's home with the expectation that she would give the family an heir without delay. For noble families, every month without a pregnancy was seen as a risk to the future of the title, the estate, and the family's political strength. In rural homes, the urgency was no less real, though the reason was simpler. More children meant more hands to work the land and a stronger chance of survival through harsh seasons. The pressure was unspoken at times, but it was there from the start. The value of a wife was often measured by how quickly she could conceive. A daughter might be received warmly, but a son was the real proof of her worth because he would carry the family name and hold the inheritance. Without a son, her position could remain fragile no matter how well she kept the household or managed its affairs. It is almost amusing that so much of a woman's standing depended on something she could influence only so much, yet she was made entirely accountable for it. Families did not hide their concern. Relatives, neighbours, and even servants might discuss her condition openly, and her body became a subject of public interest within the walls of her home. To improve her chances, the routines of her daily life could be changed in ways that allowed little personal choice. Meals were chosen for their supposed fertility benefits, with warm milk, certain herbs, and rich broths prepared at set times. Heavy labour might be reduced, but her rest and activity hours were decided for her. Older women in the family took charge of her schedule, believing that their guidance could ensure a quick pregnancy. If you compare it to modern times, it was like living under constant supervision by a personal committee, except the goal was not your comfort but the fulfillment of their expectations. In noble homes, these measures could be elaborate, involving physicians or herbalists who prescribed costly treatments and rare ingredients. In rural homes, the methods were less refined but just as controlling. A new wife might work in the fields or tend livestock until she was visibly pregnant, then be reassigned lighter tasks. She was watched closely for signs of fatigue or disobedience to dietary rules. Advice came freely, whether she wanted it or not, and failure to conceive quickly could lead to whispers about her fitness as a wife. In the most extreme cases, the possibility of her husband seeking another partner loomed in the background. For the woman, this was not just a physical expectation, but an emotional strain. The early months of marriage were supposed to be about settling into a new home, yet they were often dominated by subtle reminders of her duty to bear children. Remedies and rituals were passed down through generations. Some were harmless, like wearing charms or placing certain objects near her bed. Others were unpleasant or invasive, involving herbal brews that caused discomfort. In a society without a modern understanding of fertility, these customs carried the weight of truth. Refusing them risked being seen as stubborn or uncooperative. From my perspective, the striking part is how the focus was placed entirely on the goal of conception, with little thought given to the woman's well-being or readiness. When pregnancy was achieved, the change in treatment was immediate. Relief replaced suspicion, and approval from the family was more visible. However, the underlying purpose did not shift. Her success in conceiving was only the first step, and the cycle would begin again after the child's birth, particularly if the child was not a boy. For many women, married life became a rhythm of pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery, with little time outside those roles. This was reinforced by the nature of medieval marriage itself. In most cases, marriage was as much a business arrangement between families as it was a personal relationship. The wife's body was part of the agreement, and the children were its proof. The concept of delaying motherhood or choosing not to have children simply did not exist within the accepted norms. Traditions were strong, and the influence of elders over the household was nearly absolute. The same rules applied regardless of class. In a manor or a small village, the expectation that a wife would bear children quickly was nearly universal. The difference was only in the resources used to encourage it. A noble woman might drink imported spiced wine and consult learned physicians, while a peasant wife would follow the advice of village elders and use herbs gathered nearby. Yet both lived under the same measure of value their ability to give birth, preferably to sons, and preferably soon. The private impact on the women themselves was rarely acknowledged in public. A bride who could not conceive quickly might be isolated. Her presence at family events reduced, or her voice in household matters diminished. The pressure could extend beyond the immediate family. Neighbours and other members of the community often shared the belief that a wife's purpose was to continue the line. In that climate, even casual interactions could be tinged with judgment. Some women found ways to cope, taking comfort in the company of other wives who shared the same burden. Quiet conversations during market visits or while working in the yard could offer a small sense of solidarity. Yet these moments were brief, and did not change the reality that her place in the household depended on her fulfilling the role set for her. For those who could not or did not meet the expectation, the consequences were real. In certain regions, legal or church interventions could dissolve marriages deemed unfruitful, allowing the husband to remarry. Even without formal separation, a wife without children could find herself living on the edges of her household, replaced in importance by younger relatives or by women who had given birth to heirs. When a pregnancy did come, the focus shifted to ensuring a safe birth. A new set of customs and restrictions took over, each designed to protect the unborn child and the mother. These practices were deeply rooted in the same mindset that had driven the urgency to conceive the belief that the future of the family rested on her body and the children it could produce. This transition from the expectation to conceive to the rituals of pregnancy is where the next chapter unfolds. It reveals not only the methods used to guide a pregnancy to term, but also how control over a woman's life deepened once that long-awaited sign of success appeared. When the first signs of pregnancy failed to appear, the attention in a medieval household often shifted from managing a young wife's daily life to pushing her toward remedies and rituals meant to call a child into being. The ideas guiding these actions came from a mixture of local superstition, religious symbolism, and family tradition. These practices were not seen as strange in their own time. They were part of a shared belief that conception could be influenced by deliberate acts, by objects imbued with certain powers, and by the right sequence of ceremonies. For the woman involved, it meant another layer of control over her body, this time wrapped in the language of hope and blessing. One of the most visible customs was the use of charms and talismans. Pieces of bone from specific animals, teeth taken from wolves, or claws from birds of prey were worn on cords around the neck or sewn into small pouches and kept beneath clothing. Families believed these items carried the strength or vitality of the creature they came from, and that their presence could encourage fertility. It is almost amusing that in a time without understanding of biology, the answer to complex questions of conception was thought to hang from a string around the neck. These charms were not simply decorative, they were handled carefully, blessed by local priests or wise women, and sometimes replaced at certain phases of the moon to renew their power. Beyond personal amulets, Some households turned to public or communal rituals. In many regions, springs, wells, or pools were thought to hold sacred qualities. Women hoping for children were taken to these places, sometimes at dawn, sometimes during a festival linked to fertility. The water was considered a direct channel for divine favour, and bathing in it or drinking from it was believed to cleanse the body and prepare it for new life. Families could travel significant distances to reach a particular site known for its blessed water. The ritual might involve walking around the well a set number of times, leaving offerings such as bread or flowers, and then immersing or washing in the water. The act was as much about community belief as it was about the individual woman. Not all remedies were gentle. Some involved consuming mixtures that today would seem unwise or even dangerous. A number of traditions called for blending certain herbs with animal blood to create a tonic meant to call the child into the womb. The exact ingredients varied, but they could include strong-smelling plants, roots considered warming to the body, and the fresh blood of a recently killed animal, often a goat or a bird. The mixture was usually prepared by someone regarded as knowledgeable in such matters, perhaps a village healer or an older female relative. If you think about it in modern terms, it was like following a strict health regimen designed by people who had no access to real medical information, but complete confidence in their methods. These rituals were rarely optional for the woman at the centre of them. Declining to participate could be seen as rejecting the chance to fulfil her duty, and that could damage her standing in the household. Even if she felt no belief in the charms or the ceremonies, the social pressure was strong enough to bring her to the well, or to place the amulet around her neck. In some cases, she might even be taken to these places without much explanation, simply told it was for her benefit. There were variations across regions and social classes. In noble households, fertility rituals could be combined with formal blessings from the church, elaborate processions, or the giving of costly gifts to monasteries in exchange for prayers. In rural settings, the approach was more direct and practical, often relying on what could be gathered or made locally. Still, the underlying idea was the same if conception had not happened naturally. It could be encouraged by aligning the woman with symbols and forces thought to be favourable. The psychological effect of these practices was mixed. For some women, participating might have brought a sense of hope or comfort, even if the methods were questionable. For others, it was another reminder that their worth was tied to an outcome they could not entirely control. From my point of view, it is telling that these rituals, no matter how strange they may seem now, were treated as serious responsibilities rather than personal choices. The family's involvement ensured that the process was public, and success or failure was measured and remembered. Many of these rituals were seasonal, tied to planting or harvest times. When the cycles of the earth were seen as connected to human fertility, it was common for women to be advised to attempt conception at specific points in the year, and rituals might be timed accordingly. This added another layer of structure to a woman's life, as her most private experiences were linked to the rhythms of the community. There were also beliefs about the conduct of the woman herself during the period when these rituals were in effect. Certain foods were forbidden, certain activities discouraged, and even certain people were avoided for fear of transferring bad luck or illness. A woman might be told not to enter a room where someone had recently died, or to avoid looking at deformed animals. She might be instructed to carry out small acts daily, like lighting a candle at a family altar, or placing a hand on her abdomen after morning prayers. These small, repetitive actions were thought to reinforce the larger ceremonies. The combination of amulets, public rituals, and controlled behaviour created an environment where a woman's life could be dominated by the pursuit of pregnancy. There was little room for questioning whether these methods worked, because the community's collective belief made them unquestionable. Success was attributed to the ritual, and failure meant more effort was needed. Even when pregnancy occurred naturally, the credit could be given to the most recent charm or blessing. The persistence of these practices shows how deeply embedded they were in the fabric of medieval life. They were not isolated superstitions, but part of a network of expectations that guided how families responded to the challenge of childlessness. To step outside them was to risk standing apart from the community's shared understanding of how the world worked. In a time when uncertainty was constant and mortality high, rituals like these gave people a sense of order, even if that order was built on fragile foundations. The transition from these fertility rites to the next stage of pregnancy brought its own set of customs. Once a woman was believed to have conceived, the focus shifted from calling the child to protecting it. That phase, with its strict rules and careful watch over every movement and meal, formed another chapter in the story of how medieval families tried to control life before it even began. In the medieval world, the early weeks of a suspected pregnancy brought a new kind of attention to a woman's body. Without medical tools or accurate tests, families relied on a set of crude methods to decide whether conception had taken place. These methods were shaped by tradition, local superstition, and the limits of the era's knowledge. They were taken seriously, even though they offered little certainty. For the woman, it meant being observed, examined, and sometimes subjected to uncomfortable experiments before she herself might feel sure of the change within her. One of the most common practices was simple visual observation. Older women in the household would watch for shifts in the colour of her skin, changes in the way she moved, and even the set of her facial expression. A pale or glowing complexion could be interpreted as a sign, depending on local belief. Eyes that seemed heavy or brighter than usual might be noted, and the shape of her waistline inspected during routine dressing. Families also believed that pregnancy could be detected by the way a woman breathed. A slower, deeper pattern was taken as evidence. This could lead to awkward moments where her breathing was quietly studied while she worked or sat at the table. It is almost amusing to think how much certainty they placed on such vague and easily misread signs. The scrutiny extended beyond sight and sound to smell. Some believed a woman's scent would subtly change, and this too was noted and discussed. For those who wanted more than observation, there were tests involving plants and herbs. One method placed a small bundle of certain leaves or flowers in a bowl with the woman's urine, then waited to see if the plant changed colour, wilted quickly, or gave off a particular smell. These reactions were thought to reveal the presence of new life. The specific plants used varied by region. Some favoured barley or wheat seeds, believing that faster sprouting when watered with a woman's urine indicated pregnancy. Others used strong-scented herbs, expecting that certain changes in aroma could give a clear answer. While these methods sound more like folk magic than science, they were respected enough to be repeated generation after generation. If you compare it to modern times, it was like performing a laboratory test without instruments, training, or even a clear idea of what you were measuring. Dreams also held diagnostic weight. If a woman dreamed of holding a child, picking fruit, or seeing certain animals, these were treated as messages about her condition. Dreams involving water, especially calm, clear water, were considered positive signs. Relatives might gather to hear her describe her dreams and then offer their interpretations. Some women learned to shape their storytelling to encourage a favourable conclusion, especially if they were under pressure to conceive. A dream could not prove pregnancy, but in an environment where hope mattered as much as fact, it could strengthen belief and reduce suspicion. From my perspective, this reliance on dreams says more about the community's need for reassurance than about the accuracy of their methods. These practices were often layered together. A woman might be observed for physical changes, tested with plants, and questioned about her dreams all within the same week. The combined results would form the family's opinion. If the signs were seen as positive, pregnancy preparations could begin immediately. This could mean changes to her work schedule, alterations to her diet, and the introduction of protective charms around her living space. If the results were inconclusive or negative, more rituals might be tried to encourage conception, and the scrutiny would continue. The process could be intrusive. A woman's privacy was minimal, and her body became a public matter within the household. While some may have accepted this as part of life, others surely felt the weight of constant evaluation. In noble families, the stakes were higher because an heir's arrival was not just a private joy, but a matter of political stability. The involvement of physicians or clergy could add further layers of examination, though their methods were often no more reliable than those of village elders. For women in rural settings, the same lack of privacy existed, though the social circle was smaller. Neighbours and relatives might exchange opinions about her condition, and her absence from certain tasks could fuel speculation. Even her movements in public, how she walked, how much she carried, whether she appeared tired could become part of the diagnosis in the eyes of those around her. These crude methods of detection also shaped the emotional landscape of early pregnancy. False positives could lead to weeks of preparation and expectation, only to end in disappointment when menstruation returned. False negatives could delay care or protection at a critical stage. Yet the community's willingness to trust these signs shows how strong the link was between tradition and the management of women's reproductive lives. In this environment, the woman's voice carried little weight. Even if she felt certain she was pregnant, the household's belief depended on its own chosen tests. Conversely, if she suspected she was not, the signs others thought they saw might outweigh her knowledge of her body. The balance of authority lay firmly with the observers, not the observed. Once the household agreed a pregnancy was likely, the next phase began. Attention shifted from diagnosis to protection. Her routine would change, her activities limited, and a new set of customs would guide her days. These measures were intended to safeguard both mother and child, but they also deepened the control exerted over her life. That stage, with its strict rules and symbolic acts, formed the next chapter in the long journey from marriage to motherhood in the medieval world. In the medieval world, once a pregnancy was believed to be certain, a new set of rules began to shape a woman's daily life. These were not gentle suggestions. They were strict prohibitions rooted in fear, symbolism, and inherited custom. The aim, at least in the minds of those enforcing them, was to protect both the mother and the unborn child from harm. Without modern medicine, people turned to a system of taboos that blended superstition and community belief. For the woman, it meant another narrowing of freedom, with her movements, her diet, and even her gaze brought under control. One of the most widely held prohibitions was against looking at the dead. It was believed that seeing a corpse could pass an invisible corruption onto the living child. The term amvia, or being touched by the spirit of the dead, described the fear that the soul of the deceased could disturb the balance of life within the womb. Funerals were avoided, even for close relatives, and pregnant women might be steered away from streets where a body was being carried to burial. This restriction could be deeply isolating, as it removed her from important communal rituals. It is almost amusing how the same people who urged her to be a central figure in family life could also insist she hide from it, at moments they considered dangerous. The same logic applied to places associated with death in a more public and violent form. Sites of execution, gallows, and scaffolds were seen as deeply dangerous for an expectant mother. Passing near them was thought to invite bad spirits, or the restless energy of those who had died unwillingly. Public executions, which were community events for many, were strictly off-limits. A pregnant woman might be kept inside if the crowd was gathering nearby, not just to avoid the sight but to prevent her from breathing in what was considered tainted air. Avoiding these spaces was meant to guard the child from inheriting a troubled spirit or a doomed fate. If you compare it to modern times, it was like banning someone from entire streets or neighbourhoods simply because of what had once happened there. Food, too, was carefully monitored, and certain items were completely forbidden. Among these were fruits with seeds. The belief was that eating them could cause a blockage in the womb, making birth difficult or even impossible. This idea came from the visible hardness and size of seeds, which people imagined could physically interfere with the developing child. Grapes, pomegranates, and certain melons were avoided entirely. even if they were otherwise common in the household. In some regions, the rule was extended to nuts and legumes, further narrowing the woman's diet. From my perspective, these restrictions show how physical fears and symbolic thinking were merged into one set of rules that could override common sense. These taboos were not optional. They were enforced by family members, neighbours, and sometimes by the broader community. Older women in the household often took on the role of guardian, reminding the pregnant woman of what she could and could not do. If she broke a rule, even accidentally, it could lead to whispered worries about the baby's health or open criticism about her carelessness. The constant watchfulness meant that every step outside her room could feel monitored. The list of prohibitions could extend far beyond the three most commonly remembered ones. Some communities believed a pregnant woman should not look at animals giving birth, in case the sight brought pain to her labour. Others forbade her from standing in doorways, which were thought to trap the flow of life. Even sitting in certain chairs could be avoided if someone claimed a stillbirth had happened to a previous occupant. The effect was a gradual shrinking of her safe spaces, both physically and socially. In noble households, the restrictions might be formalised into a set of rules that were known to the entire staff. Servants were instructed to keep her away from certain areas of the castle or manor. Foods deemed unsafe were removed from kitchens entirely to prevent mistakes. The woman's chambers might be rearranged to avoid objects with negative associations, and visitors were screened for recent exposure to death or illness. In rural homes, the enforcement was more direct and personal, with family members stepping in to block her path or remove an offending item from her hands. The prohibitions also influenced her mental world. She became aware that her every action, and even her gaze, could be interpreted as having consequences for the child. While some women may have found reassurance in the structure of these rules, others must have felt trapped by them. The inability to attend a funeral for a loved one, or to walk freely through her village, could deepen her sense of separation from normal life. There was also the matter of compliance. Many women likely followed the rules without question, having grown up with the same beliefs. Others may have quietly doubted them but lacked the power to resist. The cost of open defiance was too high, as any complication in pregnancy or birth could be blamed on her failure to observe the taboos. This gave the rules a kind of self-reinforcing power. No one wanted to be the one held responsible if something went wrong. The practical effects of these taboos on the health of the mother and child were minimal or non-existent, but they shaped the social experience of pregnancy in profound ways. They marked a woman as different, set apart from others, and placed her under a system of control that extended beyond her wishes. In the eyes of her community, these rules were acts of care, yet they were also tools of restriction. Once these prohibitions were in place, they would remain until the child was born. Only then could she move freely, attend public gatherings, and eat without second-guessing every bite. Until that moment, her life moved within a carefully defined boundary, drawn not by walls but by the invisible lines of belief. The transition from the constraints of pregnancy to the preparations for birth brought its shift in focus, as the household turned from protecting the unborn child to ensuring the mother's survival in the dangerous days ahead. That stage of her journey carried its customs and its own pressures, and it would be the next step in the long sequence that defined her role. In the weeks after a pregnancy was believed to be certain, the focus in many medieval households shifted from restrictions and taboos to active supervision. The idea was that a mother-to-be required constant watch, not only for her safety, but for the well-being of the unborn child. This was not a casual arrangement. A specific person was chosen to take on the role of guardian, living with or near the pregnant woman and observing her closely from morning until night. This guardian might be a trusted female relative, an experienced household servant, or a midwife hired to remain in the home until the birth. In noble families, the decision was made with careful thought. A midwife who had attended several births in the family could be chosen because she already understood the customs of the household. She would be given access to the private rooms of the expectant mother and the authority to enforce rules. Her tasks went beyond healthcare. She was expected to manage the woman's routine, oversee her meals, and keep her from any action that might be judged as harmful. It is almost amusing how a woman could be declared the most precious person in the house, while being treated as though she had no judgment of her own. Every choice, from what she ate to when she rested, could pass through the guardian's approval. A key duty of this attendant was to monitor and record any changes in the woman's body and behaviour. In large households, the notes might be written and stored with other domestic records. They could include observations about appetite, skin tone, mood, and patterns of sleep or movement. In smaller homes, the guardian might report verbally to senior family members, especially to the woman's mother-in-law. In modern life, it would be like living with someone who keeps a running diary of your personal habits and shares it with your boss. These records, whether written or spoken, shaped the household's decisions about the woman's activities and sometimes even about the timing of rituals meant to protect her pregnancy. The guardian's responsibilities included direct intervention whenever the pregnant woman attempted something seen as risky. This could mean removing an object from her hands, urging her to sit and rest, or guiding her away from a place believed to be unsafe. Forbidden acts ranged from lifting heavy buckets to walking long distances or eating food thought to carry bad luck. From my perspective, this combination of help and authority shows how easily care can be used as a way to control someone. In many cases, the guardian's authority was backed by the head of the household, leaving the pregnant woman with little room to refuse. In wealthy homes, the guardian often acted as a gatekeeper for visitors. Friends, relatives, and even other servants needed approval before they could enter the pregnant woman's chambers. The stated reason was to protect her from illness, but the rule also allowed the guardian to control her social contact. In rural villages, the same role existed in a less formal way. An older woman might arrive unannounced to check on the expectant mother, give advice, and ensure she was following all the expected customs. For the pregnant woman, this watchful presence could be both a source of comfort and a burden. Knowing that someone was always nearby might ease her fears, but it also meant she lived with almost no privacy. Her personal choices were often overridden, and her opinions on what she could manage physically might be dismissed. In disputes, the guardian's word was usually final, especially if older family members supported her. The guardian herself carried significant pressure. A healthy birth would reflect well on her abilities, while any complication could draw suspicion or blame. This risk encouraged her to enforce every rule strictly, even if it meant limiting the woman's independence more than necessary. In some cases, if the guardian proved her capability, she could continue serving the family after the birth, helping care for the newborn and advising the mother during recovery. In noble households, the guardian's work often included coordination with physicians and preparation for the delivery. She might manage supplies of clean linens, herbal remedies, and oils, ensuring everything was ready weeks in advance. She might also arrange for religious blessings or protective charms to be placed in the woman's room. In rural homes, the tasks were simpler but no less important, often involving the preparation of herbal teas, the maintenance of warmth and cleanliness in the living space, and constant nighttime watch. Regardless of wealth or class, the presence of a guardian reflected the same belief pregnancy was a shared responsibility and a matter of public interest within the family. The woman's body was not regarded as her private domain. It was managed and observed by others, shaped by tradition, and reinforced by generations of practice. For some women, this could bring reassurance in a time when childbirth was dangerous. For others, it was a constant reminder that their independence was secondary to the expectations placed upon them. As the pregnancy advanced, the level of supervision often increased. The guardian might limit the woman's movements even further, insisting she remain indoors or spend more time resting. Visitors could be reduced to only the most trusted relatives. Meals might be adjusted to match beliefs about the final stages of pregnancy. Every sign of fatigue or discomfort was noted and discussed with the family. By the last weeks, the guardian's control could extend into every corner of the woman's life. leaving her with little more than the role of patient in her own home. The system was presented as care, but it also served to reinforce the structure of authority in the household. It placed the pregnant woman under a single figure who answered to the family elders rather than to her. This ensured that the family's rules and traditions took priority over her personal preferences. Even moments of kindness or genuine concern were framed within the expectation that she must comply for the sake of the child and the honour of the household. In the final days before birth, the guardian's presence would become even more constant. She might sleep in the same room, prepare the birthing area, and keep a steady watch for signs of labour. The transition from pregnancy supervision to managing the birth was seamless, and for the woman, it meant moving from one controlled environment directly into another. The household saw this as necessary to ensure a safe delivery, but it also meant the pregnant woman never experienced a moment when her life was entirely her own. The role of the guardian ended only after the birth and the initial recovery period. By then, the patterns of control were so established that they could continue in new forms, shaping how the mother cared for her child and how she was allowed to resume her duties. In this way, the position of the guardian was more than a temporary measure. It was part of a larger tradition that defined how pregnancy and motherhood were handled in the medieval world, a tradition that blended care with control and left little room for personal choice. By the time the final weeks of pregnancy arrived, the focus of the household shifted from constant supervision of the mother-to-be to preparing the space where the birth would take place. This preparation was not done casually. In many medieval households, it took on the weight and structure of a sacred ritual. Every object brought into the room, every scent that filled the air, and every surface that could be seen or touched was thought to influence the safety of the mother and child. One of the first acts was the placing of protective charms on the doors and windows of the room. These charms could take different forms depending on local custom and family belief. In some places, it was a small carved figure tied with a strip of cloth. In others, a twisted cord knotted in a certain pattern. The purpose was always the same, to block any malevolent force from entering. The irony is that the greatest threat to childbirth in those days was not evil spirits, but the lack of clean conditions and proper medical care. Still, the fear of unseen dangers was so strong that no family would risk leaving the room unguarded. Once the charms were in place, the next step was to prepare the air. This meant burning incense or certain dried herbs, chosen for their scent and their supposed power to drive away harmful influences. Sage, rosemary, and juniper were common, though some regions used more unusual plants, passed down through generations of midwives. The smoke curled upward and lingered, giving the room a heavy, distinct smell that marked it as ready for the event to come. If this were done in a modern home, the effect would probably be mistaken for setting up a themed relaxation spa. In the medieval mind, though, it was a shield against danger, as essential as food or water. Mirrors and other reflective surfaces were treated with special caution. It was widely believed that a newborn soul, still unsteady and easily influenced, could be drawn into a mirror's reflection and trapped there. To prevent this, every mirror in the room was covered with cloth, and any polished metal that might reflect light was hidden away. This practice sometimes extended to covering glass panes or removing bowls of water from the space. I find it striking how much effort was put into controlling not just what entered the room, but what the room itself could reveal. The furnishings were arranged with care. The bed for the mother was placed in a position that allowed the midwife to move freely around it, yet kept her head facing in what was considered a lucky direction. Additional stools, benches, and cushions were set nearby for attendants. Warm blankets were prepared and folded at the foot of the bed. A small table held whatever tools and supplies the midwife expected to need, from cloths for cleaning to jars of herbal ointments. Lighting was another consideration. In winter, candles were set so their light fell softly and did not cast deep shadows, which were thought to attract misfortune. In summer, windows were partly covered to filter the sunlight. The idea was to create an environment that was neither too bright nor too dim, balancing comfort with symbolic protection. The preparation often included a small space for prayer or blessing. In Christian households, this might be a crucifix or a saint's image placed where the mother could see it. In other traditions, it might be a set of charms or an altar for offerings. These items were believed to call on divine help for a safe delivery. Once the physical space was arranged, the household turned to the flow of people in and out of the room. Only those directly involved in the birth were allowed to remain during labour. Visitors could bring bad news, bad luck, or simply a distraction. This control of entry was part of the ritual, reinforcing the idea that the birthing room was a separate world, sealed off from everyday life until the child arrived safely. In noble homes, the preparations could be elaborate. Fine linens embroidered with protective symbols might be brought out, and fresh flowers arranged to sweeten the air. In rural homes, the steps were simpler, but no less deliberate. Even in the smallest cottage, the charms, the smoke of burning herbs, and the careful covering of mirrors would mark the transformation of an ordinary room into a space for one of life's most dangerous and important moments. The ritual of preparing the birthing room served more than one purpose. It calmed the household, giving everyone clear tasks to complete, and it reassured the mother that all possible measures had been taken. At the same time, it reflected a deep belief in the connection between the spiritual world and the physical body. Childbirth was not seen as a purely natural process. It was a crossing point between life and death, watched over by forces both visible and unseen. In some regions, the preparations continued until the very onset of labour. If signs of trouble appeared, new charms could be added, stronger incense burned, or additional prayers said. In this way, the room was not just prepared once, but continually adjusted to keep it in harmony with the needs of the moment. The symbolism of these acts endured long after the birth. Some families kept the charms used in the room as keepsakes, believing they retained a protective influence. Others would burn them in a final act meant to release any lingering danger. The smoke from this burning was thought to seal the event and protect the mother and child as they moved forward into everyday life. While the practical impact of these rituals on the safety of childbirth was minimal, their effect on the emotions of those involved was significant. They offered structure in a time of uncertainty and a sense of control in a process that could quickly turn dangerous. The birthing room became not just a physical space, but a container for hope, fear, and tradition. As the final days before birth drew near, the room stood ready, every charm hung in its place, every surface arranged just so, the air carrying the layered scent of herbs and incense. For the mother-to-be, stepping into this prepared space was like stepping into a stage set for the most intense scene of her life. The guardian who had watched her for months would now stand ready beside her, and the midwife would take her position. The moment of waiting was almost over, and the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Once the birthing room had been arranged and all the charms, scents, and protections were in place, attention turned to the objects that would be directly used during labour. These were not simply laid out on a whim. Each item had a practical role and a place in the long tradition of childbirth. The most central of these was the birthing chair. Unlike ordinary chairs, the birthing chair was made specifically for the demands of labour. It was usually crafted from sturdy wood, with a wide seat and a large circular opening in the middle. This design allowed the midwife to work from below while the mother sat, supported on all sides. Some chairs had armrests carved with smooth curves for the mother to grip, while others had simple flat sides. The legs were often short and solid to keep the chair stable during the most intense moments. It is remarkable that such a simple design, which might look crude by modern standards, was actually the product of generations of practical refinement. In wealthier households, the birthing chair might be polished and decorated, perhaps with carvings of protective symbols or inlaid patterns. In poorer homes, it was plain, perhaps borrowed from another family or quickly assembled by a local carpenter. Regardless of appearance, the function remained the same. The chair was positioned in a way that allowed light to fall evenly on the mother and the midwife's working area, without casting sharp shadows. Alongside the chair, there was often a rope or wooden bar suspended from the ceiling or mounted across the room. The mother could hold this to help her balance and bear down during contractions. In some cases, it was a thick braided cord, worn smooth from use in many births. In others, it was a polished wooden beam, secured firmly so it would not move. Holding on to this gave the mother something solid to focus on and provided leverage during the hardest pushes. If you walked into such a room today without knowing its purpose, you might mistake it for a strange piece of exercise equipment. The midwife also kept a supply of oils or animal fats for lubrication. These were stored in small clay or metal containers, sometimes warmed before use. The scent varied depending on the source. Some were mild, while others carried a strong, earthy aroma. The purpose was to ease the passage of the baby and reduce tearing. The use of these substances was both a matter of tradition and necessity, especially in a time when surgical intervention was dangerous and often avoided unless absolutely necessary. Cloths of different sizes were stacked nearby. Some were for cleaning the mother, others for wrapping the newborn. These might be made of linen or wool, depending on what was available. In wealthier settings, they were sometimes embroidered or edged with coloured thread, not purely for decoration but as a mark of care and respect for the occasion. The midwife's tools could include small knives or scissors for cutting the umbilical cord, and in some places, heated metal instruments for sealing it. These were kept covered until needed, partly to keep them clean and partly to avoid alarming the mother. Cleanliness, as understood in the period, meant free from visible dirt rather than sterile in the modern sense. Water was often brought into the room in advance for washing hands and tools, and in some cases it was infused with herbs thought to protect against infection. The chair itself was sometimes adjusted during labour. If the mother became too tired to remain upright, cushions could be added behind her back, or she might be moved to a lower stool or even to the bed. The rope or bar could be removed or repositioned to give her more comfort. These adjustments were part of the midwife's role, responding to the needs of the mother rather than following a rigid method. Some midwives carried their birthing chairs, ropes, and tools from one home to another. These travelling kits were a sign of their profession and their readiness to attend a birth at short notice. The equipment might be wrapped in cloth to protect it during transport, with herbs tucked inside to mask any odours. This portability allowed even remote households to receive skilled assistance, though the quality of the tools varied widely. In noble households, there might be several attendants working together, each responsible for part of the preparation. One might hold the rope in place, another manage the oils, while the midwife focused entirely on the delivery. The birthing chair could be placed on a special mat, sometimes woven with patterns believed to protect mother and child. In contrast, in rural homes, the scene was simpler, with perhaps only the midwife and a female relative present. I think there is a quiet dignity in the way these tools, no matter how basic, were treated with such seriousness and care. After the birth, the chair and tools were cleaned as best as possible and stored away until needed again. In some traditions, the chair was placed in the sun for several days to remove lingering odours and to purify it. Oils and fats were replenished, ropes checked for wear, and cloths laundered if they could be reused. If a birth had gone badly, there might be additional rituals to cleanse the items spiritually before they were used again. The design of these tools reflected a balance between the physical realities of childbirth and the beliefs that shaped medieval life. The birthing chair and support ropes made use of gravity and human strength in a practical way. The oils addressed a very real medical need, even if the understanding of anatomy was limited. At the same time, the arrangement of these items in the room, their decoration, and the rituals surrounding their use were deeply tied to ideas about luck, protection, and the influence of unseen forces. To the people of the time, these tools were not merely objects. They were part of a network of preparation, intention, and tradition. Each one had its place, its moment, and its meaning. When the midwife stepped into the birthing room and saw the chair ready, the rope secured, and the oils at hand, she knew that everything was in order for the work ahead. As the mother lowered herself into the chair, hands gripping the rope or beam, the centuries of tradition behind these tools became more than history. They became the framework for the final, difficult stage of bringing a child into the world. The quiet before the first cries was filled with the creak of wood, the smell of warmed oil, and the firm, steady presence of the midwife at her side. In that moment, every tool was in its place, and every hand knew what to do. Once the birthing chair, ropes, oils, and cloths were arranged, there came the matter of controlling who could be present during the birth. In many households, this was not a casual decision. The rules about entry into the birthing room were strict, and they were enforced not just by the midwife but by the family as a whole. This was a space set apart, closed to most of the household and entirely closed to the outside world. The exclusion of men was absolute. Fathers, brothers, uncles, and even male servants were expected to remain outside no matter their rank in the household. This was partly due to ideas about modesty, but it was also linked to deeper beliefs about the nature of childbirth. The process was seen as dangerous and unpredictable, and male presence was thought to interfere with the natural flow of events. Some even believed that men brought a certain kind of energy into the room that could disturb the labouring mother or anger the protective spirits. Within the closed circle, only women with experience of childbirth were permitted. These might be older female relatives, trusted friends, or skilled midwives. Their presence served both practical and symbolic purposes. Practically, they knew how to assist the mother, adjust her position, or hand tools to the midwife without being asked. Symbolically, their presence formed a barrier, a wall of familiarity and understanding that kept the mother calm. It is interesting how a simple rule of exclusion could create such a strong sense of shared purpose inside the room. The idea of barring strangers was just as important as excluding men. Anyone who was not part of the household or known to the midwife was turned away. Strangers were thought to carry misfortune, whether through ill will, ignorance, or simply the wrong kind of energy. In some communities, even neighbours who had known the family for years might be kept out if they had not been specifically invited. The belief was that birth required a balance of forces, and an unfamiliar presence could tip that balance in the wrong direction. The doorway became the line between two worlds. On one side, there was the contained, focused atmosphere of the birthing space. On the other hand, the restless waiting of the household and the occasional sound of footsteps or whispers in the corridor. Those outside might pace, pray, or simply wait in silence, while those inside concentrated on the work of bringing new life into the world. To enforce these boundaries, the midwife or a senior female relative often took on the role of gatekeeper. She would position herself near the door, ready to intercept anyone who approached. In some cases, charms or protective objects were hung across the entrance, both to keep unwanted visitors out and to signal to everyone that this was now a sacred and protected space. The exclusion of men was so firmly rooted that even emergencies did not always change the rule. If something went wrong, the first response was to call for another experienced woman, not a man, even if he was a physician. In places where male doctors were allowed, they often had to wait until the room had been partially cleared or the mother had been covered in a way that preserved her modesty. From a modern perspective, it might seem impractical to refuse help based on gender. Yet for the people of the time, the rule was about preserving the sanctity of the birth as much as ensuring the safety of the mother. The sense of privacy was not only about who entered, but also about what was seen and heard. Women inside the room were expected to keep what they witnessed to themselves. Descriptions of the labour, the appearance of the mother, or the handling of complications were rarely shared outside. This secrecy added to the mystery of childbirth for men and younger women who had not yet experienced it. For them, birth was something spoken of in hushed tones, with details left vague. In noble households, the exclusion could be even more intense. The birthing room might be located in a secluded part of the residence, with guards or trusted servants posted in the hall to keep the curious away. Messages about the progress of the birth were sent out sparingly, often through a single designated messenger. This not only protected the mother from distraction, but also controlled the flow of information in a setting where politics and family alliances could be as sensitive as the birth itself. In rural homes, the rules were enforced more by custom than by physical barriers. A man approaching the house during a birth might be met at the door and politely told to wait elsewhere. If he ignored the instruction, he risked the disapproval of the entire community. Reputation mattered, and breaking the birthing room rule could mark a man as disrespectful or foolish for years to come. The physical arrangement of the room reflected the exclusion as well. The door might be covered with a cloth to block the view from outside. Windows could be shuttered or their lower halves screened to prevent anyone from looking in. The women inside moved freely without concern for who might be watching, secure in the knowledge that the space belonged entirely to them for the duration of the labour. This all-female environment allowed for a different kind of communication. Instructions were given with minimal words, often replaced by gestures or shared looks. Tasks flowed smoothly because the women knew what needed to be done without discussion. For the mother, this meant less distraction, and a sense that she was surrounded by people who understood every stage of what she was going through. I find it notable that this tradition created one of the few spaces in the period where women held complete control and authority. When the birth was over, the rule about outsiders remained in place until the mother and baby were ready to be presented to the rest of the household. The woman would clean the room, tidy away the tools, and ensure that both mother and child were settled before allowing anyone else inside. This gradual reopening of the space marked the transition from the protected, intimate work of labour to the public celebration of a new life. These rules about presence in the birthing room were part practical caution, part cultural belief, and part social structure. They shaped the way births were experienced, remembered, and retold. For the women inside, it was a time of shared labour and trust. For those outside, it was a moment of waiting and anticipation, held at a respectful distance. The quiet authority of the midwife, the solidarity of the female attendants, and the firm exclusion of anyone deemed unsuitable all combined to create a space unlike any other in the household. It was temporary yet absolute, a small world with its own rules and rhythms, lasting only as long as the birth required and dissolving as soon as the child was safely in its mother's arms. Once the boundaries of the birthing space were set and the presence of each person was determined, attention turned to the atmosphere inside. One of the most carefully considered aspects was sound. The sounds allowed, encouraged, or forbidden during labour varied widely from place to place, shaped by layers of belief, superstition, and habit. The moment was thought to be delicate, both physically and spiritually, and the noise within the room could either protect or endanger the process. In some communities, silence was considered essential. This was not simply a matter of keeping the room calm. The belief was that sudden or loud noises could frighten the baby as it entered the world, disturbing its first moments and even affecting its temperament. In such places, the women present moved quietly, spoke in low tones if they spoke at all, and refrained from unnecessary activity that might cause sound. Cloth was handled gently, tools were set down softly, and the midwife's instructions were given with minimal words. The air felt heavy with expectation, broken only by the mother's breathing and the faint creak of the birthing chair. The silence could be so complete that even those outside the room would lower their voices or stop certain activities. Neighbours might postpone chores involving hammering or chopping wood, and children were kept from running past the house. The effort to maintain this stillness showed how deeply the idea of protecting the newborn's first impressions was embedded in the community's values. It is striking to think that something as natural as speaking could be seen as dangerous in such a moment. In other regions, the approach was entirely different. Rather than avoiding noise, families and midwives encouraged loud, rhythmic sounds during labour. These might include drumming, clapping, or even singing in strong voices. The purpose was to drive away harmful spirits or ill fortune that might linger near the birthing space. This was not random noise, but deliberate patterned sound believed to create a protective barrier around the mother and child. In these births, the room could be alive with the beat of a drum, the stamping of feet, or the sharp sound of clappers made from wood or bone. The choice of which approach to follow was often rooted in local history and passed down without question. A family that had always observed silence would see noise as reckless. A family accustomed to loud ritual would consider silence a dangerous neglect of duty. From a modern point of view, these customs might seem like opposites, but in their own context, each was simply another form of protection. Religious chanting was another common sound in certain areas. In such births, the low murmur or steady recitation of prayers filled the room from start to finish. This was done not only for the sake of the mother's comfort, but as a spiritual safeguard for the child. The chanting could come from a single person, often the eldest woman present, or from several women in turns, keeping the sound continuous while others tended to the work. The tone was steady and unbroken, creating a rhythm that matched the slow progress of the labour. The nature of the sound could also shift with the stage of the birth. In some traditions, the beginning of labour was accompanied by quiet or gentle sounds, which became louder and more energetic as the moment of delivery approached. In others, the sound would start strong to clear the space of negative forces and then soften to welcome the child into a calm environment. The rules were rarely written down but were known by heart to those who had attended many births. For the mother, the chosen sound pattern could influence her experience deeply. Silence could heighten her awareness of each movement and sensation, making the labour feel more inward-focused. Loud ritual could give her a sense of being supported and defended by those around her. The rhythm of drumming or chanting might help her keep her breathing steady or distract her from discomfort. I find it fascinating how the same act of giving birth could be shaped so differently by something as simple as sound. Outside the room, sound carried meaning as well. A silent room might signal that all was proceeding normally according to tradition, or it could cause anxiety if the custom was to make noise. Conversely, a noisy room could reassure those outside in some communities, or cause unease in others. The sound, or lack of it, was a message to the waiting household, even if it was not meant as one. There were also beliefs about certain sounds to avoid at all costs. Whistling was sometimes thought to invite unwanted spirits. Metal clanging could be linked to misfortune. Even laughter, though not forbidden everywhere, was viewed with suspicion in certain places, as if joy in the wrong moment might draw envy from the unseen. These prohibitions were often specific to a single village or family line, passed down quietly from one generation to the next. The tools used to make sound during a birth could be treasured objects, kept only for that purpose. A particular drum might belong to the midwife and be used in every birth she attends. Wooden clappers could be passed down through several generations, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use. These items held both practical and symbolic value, representing the accumulated knowledge and care of those who had brought countless children into the world. In noble households, the use of sound was sometimes more ceremonial. Musicians or chanters might be stationed just outside the birthing chamber, their work audible but physically separate from the mother. This allowed for the maintenance of tradition while preserving the intimacy of the room. The music or chanting could continue for hours, shifting subtly in pace and tone as the labour progressed. In rural homes, the resources for sound making were simpler but no less meaningful. A hand drum, a pot struck with a wooden spoon, or even rhythmic clapping could serve the same purpose as more elaborate instruments. The focus was always on the effect, not the refinement of the sound. The intention mattered more than the artistry. Once the baby was born, the handling of sound changed. In a silence-keeping tradition, voices might rise in relief and joy, with the first cries of the child welcomed into a warmer atmosphere. In a noise-making tradition, the sounds might grow even louder for a short time to celebrate and seal the child's safe arrival. Afterward, the room would settle, and the sounds would fade into the ordinary noises of daily life. Whether the birth had taken place in complete silence, with steady chanting, or amid the beat of a drum, the memory of that sound would linger for everyone present. For the mother, it would be tied to the sensations of labour and the first sight of her child. For the attendants, it would be another link in the chain of births they had witnessed, each with its unique combination of people, tools, and sounds. Once the decisions about sound were made and the atmosphere of the birthing room was set, another matter often stirred quiet disagreement among the women present: how, if at all, to reduce the pain of labour. Pain was accepted as a natural part of childbirth, but in some places it was seen as something to be endured without interference. In others, certain methods were used to dull or distract from it. The choice of whether to allow these methods was shaped by tradition, belief, and the resources available in the household. One of the most common approaches was the use of strong drink. A cup of undiluted wine, or in some cases a stronger spirit, would be given to the mother shortly before or during the early stages of labour. The warmth of the alcohol, along with its numbing effect, could relax her muscles and blunt the sharpness of the contractions. This was not done carelessly. The amount was often small enough to take the edge off, but not enough to cause confusion or make her unsteady. The midwife or an older woman would control the cup, offering it only at certain moments. For families accustomed to the use of wine in daily life, this was seen as a reasonable and familiar aid. Yet even this simple measure was not without controversy. In more pious or conservative households, giving alcohol to a labouring woman was frowned upon, either because it was seen as indulgent or because of fears it might harm the baby. Some believed it dulled the mother's awareness too much, weakening her ability to push effectively. Others argued that any interference with the natural sensations of birth was against divine will. It is almost amusing to realise how something as ordinary as a drink could be a source of whispered judgment at such a time. Another method found in certain regions was the inhalation of herbal smoke. This might come from burning plants known for their calming or mildly sedative qualities. The herbs were placed in a small brazier or clay pot, and the smoke allowed to drift toward the mother's face. She would breathe it in slowly, sometimes through a cloth held over her mouth and nose. The effect was gentle rather than overwhelming, intended to loosen tension rather than render her unaware. Common choices included dried lavender, sage, or specific local plants known for soothing the nerves. The use of such smoke was often tied to ritual. Lighting the herbs might be accompanied by quiet chanting or the recitation of protective verses. The scent and warmth of the smoke became part of the atmosphere of the birth, and for women who had grown up with it, the process could be reassuring as well as physically helpful. But here too, there were objections. Some women disliked the heaviness of the smoke in the air. Others feared that the scent could linger too strongly on the newborn's skin or blanket. In rare cases, the burning of certain herbs was linked to beliefs about attracting unwanted spiritual attention. A simpler, more practical form of pain relief was the use of ice or cold stones. This was far less common, since ice was not easily obtained in most places and seasons, in households that could store it, perhaps by keeping it in deep cellars or bringing it from mountain regions. Small pieces would be wrapped in cloth and placed in the mother's mouth. The cold was thought to distract from the pain, giving her something to focus on during contractions. It also helped keep her from becoming overheated in the close, crowded room. This method carried no ritual meaning, relying only on the physical sensation to shift her attention. The rarity of ice made it something of a luxury, and in some communities it was viewed as an extravagant or unnecessary measure. Still, for those who had access to it, the relief it provided was valued. From a modern perspective, the image of a woman in a dimly lit birthing room quietly sucking on a piece of ice while others fanned her is unexpectedly vivid. It shows how even small comforts could take on importance in such a setting. The debate over whether to use these methods often played out quietly before the birth, sometimes in conversations between the midwife and the family's elder women. If the household had a tradition of using wine, smoke, or cold, the expectation was that it would be offered. If not, Introducing it might require careful explanation and persuasion. In many cases, the mother herself had little say in the decision, especially if it went against the usual practice of her family. Practical considerations also played a role. Wine or spirits needed to be available and of sufficient quality. The herbs for smoking had to be gathered and dried ahead of time, stored safely so they would burn cleanly. Ice or cold stones required advanced planning and storage. These preparations were another layer of work for the women responsible for the birth, adding to the tasks of readying the room, laying out linens, and preparing the birthing chair. The actual administration of these aids was handled with care. The midwife, or a trusted helper, would decide the moment to offer wine or light the herbs. Too early, and the effect might fade before the most difficult stage of labour. Too late, and the mother might already be too distracted by the pain to benefit fully. Timing was a skill built on experience, learned from many births and adjusted for the needs of each woman. Once a chosen method was used, it became part of the birth's memory. A woman who had been given wine during her first labour might expect it for the second. If she'd found comfort in the scent of burning